EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.
Hello and welcome back to EDClass's podcast. We have a great episode today as we welcome someone who knows alternative provision all too well. Today we are joined by Lucy Spencer. Lucy founded the Education Boutique, and it's a bespoke approach to alternative provision, helping to transform children's lives in education. Today we'll be discussing all about alternative provision and its benefits when implemented correctly. We'll also highlight how it can support students with mental health, behavioural or neurodivergent challenges. All right, Lucy, so thank you very much for joining us today. Can you first tell the audience a bit about yourself, what you do at Education Boutique?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. So what we do at Education Boutique is we reintegrate learners with a multitude of different needs, special educational needs, students who are EBSA, students who are NEET, older students as well. As we know, the funding goes up to age 24 when you've got an EHCP. So we really work on just re-engaging and then reintegrating back into what we call a suitable educational pathway. It doesn't necessarily always look like school. It could be that local authorities we work with decide on EOTAS packages or longer term sort of home sort of educated other than at school packages. And we really just try and focus on getting the young people and the sort of young adults that we're working with ready for work. So even if we're working with like a key stage 1 pupil, our remit is to make sure that where possible we help them to build their profile, find their interests, explore and discover and be curious about learning. And often, as I'm sure you guys do at EdClass, we start our journey with learners when they just think, I can't learn, I don't want to learn, learning is bad for me, and that's a really unique position to be in, and one that when I was in the classroom, I wasn't fully aware of. And so, yeah, it's a very privileged position to be in, to sort of feel like you're getting a young person back into a place where they feel interested about the world around them, even if that doesn't look quite so academic. But it's, a really lovely, very rewarding role.
No, yeah, good stuff. I mean, what you guys do definitely aligns with what we do as well, focusing on that reintegration model, helping them,
Yeah,
preparing them for that personal development as well, and preparing for the adulthood is what's
definitely.
amazing. And then just talk to me about your experiences. Is it a tutor or a teacher? Would you?
Both actually, yeah. So I
Yeah.
started educating in a classroom setting in a mainstream environment in Slough, and I was a year 2 teacher. So there's a lot of classroom management and a lot of trying to get the students to not only learn but sort of be in the right place at the right time and do it in a really fun way. And I think that was where I really learnt how to sort of get students and learners curious about learning when they maybe didn't really feel like actually doing it initially. I had this really amazing head teacher, and she was always talking about how you're going to hook the students at the beginning of every lesson. I sort of remember really taking that away and being like, that should just be good learning all the time, not even if someone's disengaged, that should just be the way things are presented. So I specialised quite quickly in working with autistic students. I'm neurodiverse myself as well, so it was always an area that I felt I sort of excelled in. And then I went out and taught in Dubai, so quite the antithesis of working in Slough, but really interesting again as well to see how special educational needs there was dealt with, because I experienced students being told that actually that school couldn't support them and they would have to find another setting. And for me, that was so like such an eye-opening experience. Like, a school can't say we can't support you, surely. And I remember that being quite a profound sort of moment in my journey. And then I came back and went into tutoring, and I'm very lucky. I've sort of traveled the world doing sort of world schooling, so a really alternative form of education where we use the world as our classroom. So obviously that's working with very privileged young people who come from families that have worked incredibly hard and have had real success in business. And it's the total other end of the spectrum, if you like, of the AP work that we do, where we're working with some of the most disadvantaged learners locally. But it's that same ethos, it's trying to take something and really find and squeeze out all the possibilities of curiosity and questioning and all those things that we can glean from what just looks like a regular situation. We can try and make it into something much more profound. And so that's kind of the ethos that we go into all of our all of our education with, where we're supporting a student who's preparing for GCSEs, whose parents are funding the education, or whether we're doing like a 30-hour-a-week package for a local authority where a neurodiverse learner is out of school. We specialize in a PDA profile as well, which, for people listening, pathological demand avoidance is a profile on the autistic spectrum, which is incredibly sort of profound in the AP sector, because it really does, demands cause intense, extreme anxiety, and school is full of demands, what you met, sort of physical and expected demands, if you like, so sort of non-verbal ones and also verbal. So we often see students with profiles such as a PDA profile really struggling in a school environment, and that's our sort of area of specialism, trying to reintegrate them into something that positions it in a different way.
Yeah. No, yeah, amazing stuff. Sounds you've got a vast amount of experience, really good stuff what you do. I know you speak at some events as well, talking about how important AP and how reintegrating is so important in that way. I think it's just having that adaptive model, adapting the education to meet the needs of those students, isn't it? And being able to provide a different solution to help accommodate their needs. I just want to ask about this overarching question that's come up lately about how there's a stigma of AP and how it doesn't support students the best, and they can't be transformative. What would you say from your experience of how beneficial it can truly be to help these children reach their educational potential?
I totally understand. I've seen a lot of that on LinkedIn, especially recently. And I think if we just boil it right back to misconceptions, okay, we work with students who have, certain profiles that mean that people see them as tick box of things they can't do, right? Things that they struggle with. Now, we see that with autism, with dyslexia, with, ADHD. Everyone has, as soon as you say those labels, people, whether they want to or not, they get a certain image in their mind of the person that's going to show up with that label. And quite often, when I speak at sort of events and things, I do my like sea slug analogy. So if I say the word sea slug to you, what do you think of? And people say, brown, slimy, because they've got all these misconceptions about sea and slugs. And then you show people what sea slugs actually look like, and they're like, this colorful, beautiful, they're all different, they're amazing to look at. And people are like visibly like, whoa, and it goes back to that in terms of the word alternative provision. Yes, maybe some people have preconceived ideas, or they think, oh, that didn't really work, or that's my experience. And having experiences is really important. It's how we go into the world and make sense of the world and things like that. But I would just always say to anyone who feels like that they're judging a certain sector of the education system, and I can talk about this because I come from a tutoring background, another area where historically it's had a very negative, it's pushing the elite, education higher, and that it's widening the attainment gap and things like that. And actually, if you look at tutoring now, after some really, really careful interventions and funding and a lot of hard work by the industry, tutoring is now seen as this really, way of sort of empowering learners to, on a one-to-one basis, re-engage, reintegrate back into suitable settings, and that comes under the umbrella of alternative provision. So I think the problem that we're seeing at the moment is there are alternative provision companies and alternative provision services. I think that people need to understand the difference between them. We're obviously both coming from a service point of view. We're not sitting there with alternative provision settings and schools and things like the PRUs, and that there's so much. It's such a diverse industry that the alternative provision comes under, that I feel like we're just missing a huge education piece around the differences and why we might go to different places. And I think one of the problems at the moment that we're seeing is there's an awful lot of noise around the alternative provision space. There's a lot of innovation, and that's absolutely lovely. But what we've got to remember, that the reason the alternative provision settings are growing, or the need for alternative provision or alternative educational provision, as I know we're sort of really trying to move it through to be thought of, is that it shouldn't really exist. We shouldn't really be needed if the whole system, if school, if we like, did everything it should do and it enabled these sort of other pathways to exist within them. The problem that we have at the moment is that school and the mainstream and the special educational kind of settings that there are, there's a huge gaping gap in the middle where learners fall into this little void, and that's where alternative provision comes. But the problem is actually, really, we're talking about an education system. And just like tutoring and school used to be thought of very separate things, and I've been a huge advocate for trying to merge them to being seen as working together rather than against each other. Because at the end of the day, all of us, whether you work for a mainstream school or you work for an alternative education provision or you work for a specialist school or a PRU, we take a human being that's in front of us and we want them to thrive. And we will use a load of different tools that might look different in the setting that we are actually educating in at that moment. But my point is, if I'm an educator in a school and then I move to a PRU, I might use different tools because I'm going to be working with a different human or individual that's needing my support. So this whole system is actually very I can, as an educator, I can move between different settings. As a child and a young person, I can move between different settings, but we've got these like imagined barriers between all these different things, like what we do as often educators, we put things in boxes, don't we? And at the moment, alternative education, alternative provision, we've seen the huge like national Ofsted inspection looking at AP. I was interviewed as part of that, and like that's lovely, but it's existed well before now. And I think the negative thing that we're having at the moment is the media interest in the EBSA students and learners who are missing education has really suddenly shone a light on this sector of the education system, which has always existed, but obviously is now growing and diversifying, and to meet this sort of huge and growing need that's being shown by our learners and our students. But I think the key thing, going back to the question that you were saying, is like, do we think it needs to change like the name? And there's all these different things that are sort of being suggested. It's just part of the education system. We're just teachers, we're just educators. And whilst, yes, I do agree that, with any new sector that is seeing an influx of learners into that area, we need some form of standardization. We need to know children are safe. We need to know that they're visible to multi-agency sort of services that might be involved in. And in a way, school has been around longer, so maybe they are set up a little bit better, or they've just been doing it for longer than some of the newer sort of settings. But that doesn't mean it's in any way, shape, or form a less valid part of the education system. So when I hear lots of talk about words and phrases and should we call it this, should we call it that, I just think that we all just need to take a little bit of a beat and sort of look at, actually, we're all trying to do the same thing here. It's about working together. It's about collaboration. It's always the key to successful outcomes for learners. And it's about not wasting time, spending lots of energy discussing, should we call it AEP or AP? And does it actually matter to that young person what you call your company or what you call your service? Or does it matter to them how you make them feel and what opportunities they go on to do in later life? I would suggest that's what we need to be putting our effort and our time into.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that what you were saying about having a collaborative approach, we're all trying to improve the chances for these children at the end of the day. We need to recognise that they are unique, they have their own unique experiences, and they have their own potential as well to reach. I think building those meaningful relationships as well is crucial for them as well, to help build their confidence as well, isn't it? Especially in terms of attendance. How, from your experience again, what would you say in terms of raising attendance figures? I know there's been a lot of, since the pandemic, it's double persistence absence rates and severely absence rates. What would you say? How can alternative education provisions actually help boost the attendance of these students?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of boosting, so again, quite a lot of different things to unpick for many different students. But I think we have to understand that for some learners, being physically present in a school setting is going to cause them more harm than than not being. And so we have to have ways that they can show their learning and their engagement, and it doesn't always have to be physically in a school. Now, I'm a huge advocate for people belonging, feeling part of a community, feeling like they have a purpose and a place. I think that's incredibly important. And it's something that I consistently, as an alternative education provision service rather than a setting, it's something we strive to always look for opportunities to collaborate and other ways that we might be advocating for one of our learners who's improved their attendance in terms of their one-to-one sessions in the home. We'd be then looking to reintegrate them into having some of those outside the home and then in a school setting. Or we might be saying, hey, is there an alternative provision setting that they could go to for half a day? And we'd be speaking with the local authority about adding that to the package and things. So for us, whilst that's a little bit more challenging to show, okay, well, physically, we're not a setting, they're not coming to us, but that is how we're always trying to find ways to give them that opportunity to show that they're engaging. And that could be a bit of again, a bit of an education piece. There's a lot of schools who see attendance, physical attendance, as the only way of showing, or almost it's showing that the learner's been there for the teaching, right? But a lot of our learners that we're supporting, especially neurodiverse learners, they engage with things in a wholly different way. It's about like planting seeds, and then they will grow those trees because they'll be interested and they'll be like, oh my gosh, this needs my time. I need to be doing this. So if you tell them, no, you've got to focus on this seed right here, right now. I mean, I remember when I was at school, I'd be sitting in a classroom, say like a geography classroom, and I'd be like, why am I expected to learn about the world in literally one of the smallest, tiniest little classrooms in Berkshire, and why is that a thing? What is this room? Why is this room better than, my lounge at home, or just going out into the world, maybe even for geography. But I did always really struggle with that, and I think um, that's the same for a lot of our learners. They look at school and they say, okay, well, it's a very high control environment. It's very high stakes, in terms of like lots of noise, lots of sound, and lots of overstimulation, lots of worries, lots of concerns. And is that the best place for a learner to be experiencing all their learning? Probably not for many of our learners. But I think it's not about, as again, I'm not a fan of sweeping statements to say, oh, too much emphasis is placed on school. I don't believe it is. I think community and what we see, that the huge things about preparing someone for life, we can't just educate someone at home for years and years and years and hope for them to go on and live a thriving adult life where they go to work and they, because workplaces are just as controlling and just as it's sort of overwhelming for so many learners. So what we really need to do better is just having multiple pathways and having value placed on different things in those pathways, and communicating in a really um, careful but really sort of positive way about, that it's going back to all the sort of like old school like pace language and things like that. This bit of the pathway is going to be more of a challenge for you because of XYZ. However, I'm here. That's why we're doing it on a one-to-one basis, just to maybe do it, so I can position it in a way that, we can do it in the theme of the thing that you're really into at the moment or whatever. But then actually finding those moments where they are doing things that they find a lot more comfortable, a lot more self-motivated, a lot more intrinsic, maybe spotting ways they could do them with other people, and that's the whole basis, as I'm sure is with you guys, is how we build someone up to from last April we've got a student who wasn't even doing 1 hour of one-to-one learning at home, even physically couldn't even have someone in person, um, now to doing 10 hours of online and 5 hours of reintegrative in-person tutoring back into the setting. It's very slow. It can't be rushed. And I think understanding of reintegration plans is a big part behind some of the issues that schools are having with attendance. Because I every week I see what I would class as a not very well thought out reintegration plan, which is just trying to push someone to get physically back in the door because that's what the school needs. And actually, whilst I totally understand that, because we work in partnership with so many schools, it's just about us understanding that the key to a reintegration is a sustainable one. We don't want people to have to be funding provisions like education boutique for long periods of time. But actually, if we try too quickly to get them back into school, it can go even worse. We can go even further down than where we started, and then it's an even longer road to getting them back. And maybe then at that point, it might be not back into the same setting that they're currently on roll with. It might be into a specialist provision, which has all sorts of implications for funding for the local authorities and things. So it's really it's a difficult one, isn't it? It really is.
Mm. No, yeah, I love that you're on, because what you're talking about is exactly what we love to do as well. Having that slow, steadily improved, actionable steps for these students to be able to make sure they're positively reintegrated. Because
Yeah,
otherwise, as you said, if it's too quick, then they'll just go straight back to square one. We've
yeah,
seen it time and time again. Having what you say now, those hybrid models have become really, really beneficial in the long run, haven't they?
yeah,
We've seen a lot of schools that we're working with that allows the students, yeah, they work from home, especially those who are neurodivergent with ADHD, can't get up in the morning. Well, they'll say, all right, you work from home, and then you can come in, and it slowly builds their confidence, doesn't it? But
yeah.
we do have to have that, ensure that they're getting ready for social interaction in the future to be able to, go into the workplace once they leave school, and be able to
Exactly.
ensure they are ready for that.
Absolutely, and I see that in the flip side, because also one of my other roles is I'm director of education recruitment for lots of MATs and schools as well at Eteach, and what we see there is one of the things that we're really focusing on as a system, as a service, if you like, is actually supporting neurodiverse educators to get into school placements, because we see huge difficulties. We all know that 20% of autistic adults are not it like are in work. 80% of autistic adults are not in work. So it's something that although we're with Education Boutique supporting the learners to get to those employment points, and it's not just autistic children and young people that we work with. It's all sort of all differences and difficulties that we'll support, because actually those challenges end up defining the young person when they go into their working life. And something I'm really really excited about is supporting a lot of our PDA learners to think about starting their own businesses when they're older, because then you set the rules, you work out your shift, when you're working and how you're working, and you can work in different ways. And if an interest of yours changes, you can diversify slightly and
Mm,
incorporate that interest into your business. And it's very much how a lot of us entrepreneurs and things like that do things. And so I see huge implications in terms of that. And just from even things like coding and seeing this is the way that something's working, or this is the rule. Oh, is there a way I could get around that rule? There's lots of exciting applications for neurodiverse learners in the workplace, but we almost need to become those advocates to show them how they can navigate those fairly closed hiring kind of journeys again. And I think that's also a really exciting part of what we should be doing as an alternative provision industry, is building those connections and collaborations with good companies, educating the companies, supporting companies who want to do better in terms of supporting, um, you know, neurodiverse individuals into the workplace. And yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there for both learners, for providers, for schools, for educators, for everyone. And I think it's just being a bit like laser focused into what's going to help right now, and then what could possibly change for in the future, because there's almost like two things that we've got to focus on, really. We can't just change it all now. That's not possible.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, what we're doing is we're actually implementing our teachers now, actually learning more about trauma-informed approaches, making sure they're supporting those children who've experienced this kind of this trauma. And then we need to make sure that there's due diligence as a safeguarding in place, and then the broad balance curriculum, how they're reintegrating these students as well. So important as well. Just talk to me about the PDA aspect, because I know it's very interesting. I know I'm a bit touchy. I don't really understand it 100%, but if you could just talk to me and the audience a bit more about that, what
Yeah.
it's all about, how we can help support that.
Absolutely. So the best way I do a lot of teaching and educating people about PDA profiles. So you may be too young, but do you remember the game, the bucking bronco game? It's like a little plastic
Yeah,
bronco,
yeah, yeah.
and you had to like place little items on it, and then there was some form of mechanism that randomly would just send it all flying, right?
Hmm.
That is the best way that one of my learners and me were talking about what it feels like for him at school. He's like, Lucy, I want to, with every fiber of my being, I want to be there. I want to learn. I want to be a success. I want to drive a Lamborghini, he said to me. He's like, I want success. Now, I said to him, success isn't money. Like, there's many other ways that you can be successful in life. But at the same time, I get it. But he was trying to explain to me that every time he goes in, so he has to wear a uniform. That's like item number one on the Bronco. He has to get there at a certain time. If he gets there too late, he's so panicked about getting that late, on the tutor group thing. Um, he's so panicked about that it would almost be like, I just can't even do it. It is too much of a demand that if I'm late, I get this. He wants to please in many ways, but also his body almost just, it's not a won't, it's literally a physical can't. So even if I said to everyone, guys, let's, with my little year twos back in Slough, come and sit on the carpet. That could be just that simple thing. That could just be the little piece too much on the bucking bronco that just causes a meltdown. And then to a teacher or an educator, they'll be like, all I asked him to do was this. All I asked was this. And I would say that as educators, if we've ever thought that all I asked them to do was this, you've possibly been dealing with someone. Obviously, it's not a very commonly diagnosed thing at all, but you've possibly been dealing with someone with some form of a PDA profile. Now, obviously, there are many, that's a very simplistic way of sort of explaining it, but it's the way that I think that I hope that just we can start to introspectively kind of question our own teaching as educators, because the worst thing you can do at that point when you see someone that seems to have a almost like an over the top reaction to what seems like a simple question or a simple demand, the worst thing you can do when they're in that then high cortisol fight or flight kind of reaction is to then go in with another demand or to go into a stalemate. I said come and sit on the floor. You are never going to win, and it's just going to escalate. And I think the most important thing to remember, another thing I always hear from many of the students, I'm sure you probably heard this as well, is they were absolutely great. And then one day they just couldn't go to school. It just happened overnight. It didn't just happen overnight. What's happened is that young person, that young, we're seeing people as young as 4, 5 not being able to go to school. It's not just a teenage thing. Um, they have been living in a constant state of fight or flight. Their cortisol level has been off the scale. And what happens after prolonged experience, and if you're an educator, sort of like listening to this, thinking, "What? Maybe I might have supported someone like this, or I might like to learn some more." Look up the long term impacts of exposure to cortisol, high levels of cortisol in your body. It is so profound. It's poor working memory, poor executive function, it's irritableness, it's like concentration issues. It is all of these things that very much are already part of the package, if you like, with lots of our neurodiverse sort of profiles, but it's just exacerbated even more. And I think one of the biggest important things that we can look at when we look at school and when we look at class is look at all the things that we can do to reduce cortisol. Look at all the things that we can do in terms of environment, in terms of positioning of language. How can we ask things or create environments which are going to promote lowering levels of cortisol. It's things like, and it sounds very woo-woo when you sort of talk about them not understanding the scientific things behind this, but it's things like giving people time to breathe, to get outside, to be in nature, to actually just feel that they have a bit of control. Um, and unfortunately, especially at secondary schools, that's really difficult to actually implement. And it's why we see this sudden, what they call, like, some people call it autistic burnout, some people just call it just disengagement. But it's the point where then suddenly they're just not going to school anymore, and their mental health is really poor. And you mentioned trauma informed and things like that. Trauma does not have to be one really traumatic event, as we all know. It can be a series, a long period of micro traumas. And trauma for many of my students and our students at Education Boutique is not being in an environment which hasn't validated their feelings. And they feel like they've got to try and be something else, try and do this, or try and act in a different way, because how they naturally would react isn't allowing them to sort of thrive in that environment. And that alone is also a trauma. And it's really important that when we say trauma, again, we think about what people's misconceptions might be, and that it's, oh, this one terrible event. No, it's not. It's prolonged exposure. And that's then what happens when we then see this disengagement in not wanting to learn at all, because learning is scary. Because there's this whole Hebbian learning theory, which is, cells in your brain that fire together wire together. So if you think about it, school, you might not like the bell, and the bell causes you trauma. And then after a lot of time, school is trauma because, every time the bell goes, you were really, really scared. And then you didn't like it when this happened, and this caused you like anxiety. And eventually, school becomes a traumatic place. And it's then how we then sort of unpick that. And that's what what we do in alternative provision is almost like sort of um, in allowing learners to realize that no, school isn't traumatic. School is actually a really cool, opportunity filled place. What you found difficult was the bell. Let's work on that. Let's try and do that. So it's almost like we've got to micro step it back down to be able to start sort of putting the pieces back together, to give them coping strategies, to give them belief that it's not just the whole thing. And that's what takes the time, right? We can't just do that overnight. So yeah.
No, yeah, it's got to be small increment steps, hasn't it, to be able to build
Yeah.
that confidence. I had a good chat with, I think it was Stephanie Camilleri, talking about this PDA, ADHD, that kind of stuff, and talking about the RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, how hard it is to get over that as well. And
Yeah.
it's just giving them independence as well, giving them autonomy back to be able to take control of their education, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
and stories, I think, are really important. So seeing role models that sort of talk about, I'm not saying this totally would work, for to negate all of these issues, but again, hearing stories of people who weren't maybe such a success at school but have gone on to do great things, intrinsically that can aid someone's ability to think positively. It's not going to change anything just by itself, but positioning of stories and role models and interaction with people who have gone on a similar journey is also a positive thing to think about, as a step to supporting, I guess.
yeah. No, yeah, I think it's Emma Weaver. I listened to her at a conference. She said there's 1 in 5 are neurodivergent now, and it shows how many are entrepreneurs and business owners now. It's just being able to find out what they're good at, what they're
Yeah,
comfortable with, and how they can overcome that barrier. So, but
definitely.
just talking about that working from home element as well, and that hybrid model, how beneficial can that be to be able to allow them to work from home first off, and then slowly build their confidence, of allowing them to get into full-time mainstream education? How useful can that be in the long term?
Can be very useful. It can also cause a real blocker to schools putting in place support initially. I'll give you the reason why. Is a lot of schools, because they know that they need the child to be in school, to be accessing, the education that they should be receiving at school. There's this almost like sort of concern, worry that, well, if we start them learning at home, they'll just get used to it. And I think that that is where we, as an alternative provision education service, we need to do better at negating those worries of the school. Home education, if you like, is very different to reintegrative tutoring or alternative education provision, whatever you want to call it. I usually call it, what we do is reintegrative tutoring, effectively, because I think it just negates a little bit of that concern that, oh, are you going to be sort of positioning this that, like, hey, it's fine, you can just learn from home forever now. And I think that that is the difference between, say, a tutoring service that sort of thinks, oh, actually, we'd like to do some alternative provision as well. And then the actual reintegrative tutoring sort of service that we are, where we've got that multi-agency sort of involvement, we've got those relationships at local authority level, we've got the relationships with the school, we go to all the parent carer forum kind of networks and we say, hey, let's help you. We do a lot of pro bono sort of advocacy on behalf of parents. It's very important that home education during a period of reintegrative kind of, alternative provision is not seen as the destination. Now, I know that also we then provide support for students who have EOTS packages where the local authority have gone, yep, you know what? You learn best at home. Like, that is fine. We've agreed that that's good. Let's go. And then we also provide that. So, but it's very important that when we're gathering the information about the package that we're going to produce or create, it's very important that we get all of that information. Are we going to be wanting to reintegrate them back into some sort of setting? Is this going to be the plan for a long time? So it's about understanding the funding, it's about understanding the expectations of the school, the parent, all the people involved, and then piecing together in phases how you're going to support that best. It certainly shouldn't be seen as a default destination. For us, a destination would always be being part of a community, being back in school. Now, one of the things that I do need to work with my team to do is, where we've got a lot of EOTAS learners, we need to do more to make them part of a community, because they're not being looked at to be reintegrated back into a school. So we need to do more to, we do things like in September at the beginning of the year of education. We go and we do like sort of social events at the beginning of the year and sort of meet peer groups locally and things like that. Pizza Express is always a good one. They do those free school trips and things. So we've done quite a lot of that. And, we look at the areas that we have a lot of the OTAS learners in. We obviously sort of reach out to sort of parent carer forums and things like that. And we do network, but we need to do more. Because quite frankly, that's one area of our provision that we're doing at the moment where I think we could do better, a lot better. So yeah, I think it's important that everybody thinks of the home as an important place, but also for some learners, the home isn't the right place for their learning as well, because that's their safe space. And bringing education into that safe space at the beginning, when they're not able to go back to a school at that point, sometimes also is not the right thing to do. So it's about really gathering the information to allow us to provide the right journey for that particular individual.
No, 100%. I think it's finding that balance, isn't it? What's working for them, looking into their home life, how they're engaging with their parents as well, their family life is so important. We don't, as you said, we don't want them to be working solely from home, remote education. There's been like quite of a dispute on what is remote education and AP. That for AP, there has to be actionable steps in there to be able to reintegrate, claim attendance. Whereas remote education, they could just be on their own working in through some YouTube lessons. It's just not going to be beneficial. It's going to be counterproductive in the long term. Just in terms of the relationships, building meaningful relationships, then aspect of improving the confidence for these children. How vital is that, do you think, to be able to
Yeah.
implement trust and rapport with these students so they can actually feel valued and welcomed in an environment?
That's so important. And I think that it goes back to what we were saying about feeling not heard. Quite a few of our learners are not in school because they felt that they weren't being heard. And I say heard, not listened to, because sometimes the schools are listening. They just don't know quite in their remit how to best support the very diverse needs of the particular learner. So I think the not being heard is really important because, again, it doesn't place blame necessarily. I know this would be an emotive topic for a lot of parents where they do feel that they haven't been listened to. I constantly am caught in between the fact that, we're working on behalf of my client is the learner, right? They are hands down the most important person that we serve. But we have to remember that when there's funding involved from the local authority or from the school, or it's happening in the parent's home, there is many um, relationships that need to be developed. So it's not just about the relationship with the learner. I would say it's very, very important that we consider all the relationships with all the stakeholders around that young person, because without us forging positive relationships with all the adults, all the people involved, it's just not going to get to that sustainable position of placing back into a setting, or choosing a journey or a pathway that that child or that young person is going to continue with. So, in terms of what place the relationship building aspect has on the learner, I mean, it is everything. I mean, it's absolutely everything, because the first thing is that it has to position that relationship as not one of a I'm going to pull energy from you, because that's kind of what they are choosing to avoid, at school. It's a lot of school is a lot of giving energy. The teacher needs this, you deliver. The teacher says this, you do it. And there is such amazing, um, you know, teaching strategies out there for actual the classroom. But if we just think about walking around the school in between lessons, if we just think about the, break times, play times, whatever you want to call them, um, those unstructured times can actually be just as damaging to that young person as we're not sort of talking negatively all the time about a particular teacher or the way a lesson has happened. It can just be the unstructured times as well that cause the trauma. We know other learners, other students are harsh as well, and so that is a difficult thing. But I would say that for me, when I was an educator teaching myself, when I would go to meet a learner that I knew was really disengaged from learning, we would always do a mutual show and tell to start our first lesson. I'd be like, look, parents, school, whoever I'm speaking to here, even if it doesn't look like we're doing anything particularly educational that day, um, it's a really important thing, because when you first meet someone, if I'm speaking about something I'm really passionate about, um, I'm speaking at you. You can just listen. And it's very difficult to not like someone when they're talking about something they're super passionate about. Even if you sort of think, oh, actually, yeah, I wouldn't do that myself. It's interesting because you're finding out something about this person. You're deepening your understanding of them. They're more like a story as opposed to just a physical presence in front of you. And I think what that does quite quickly is then when the tables are turned and then it's the learner's turn to talk about the things that they love, that's a really positive experience in a really easy to access way. They are talking at someone. They don't need to have too much of there's not so much of an expectation that lots of questions are going to be asked or anything like that. And I just believe it's a really useful tool for if you are starting that first session. It's always my tip if people are like, oh, Lucy, what should I do for that first lesson? I just, want to make sure I don't do anything wrong. It's not about doing things wrong. You could incorrectly position something, of course, and it just doesn't land right with the learner, and they don't really get the vibe from you, maybe, or think that it's something that they're able to engage with at that point. But I always find that sort of mutual show and tell, if you rock up as a tutor and educator, like with all things that you're passionate about. It could be medals, it could be pictures of your dog, it could be, if someone's really smart, you find out about the student, what their interests are, and you try and find a way that you also happen to be interested in something that they are. Um, that's always a really great way of starting off that relationship in a positive way.
Yeah, excellent. It's good stuff. We've got a lot of teachers there's one of our teachers who formed a good relationship with one of the students who's interested in computer games, and they just
Yeah,
hit it off because they're interested in computer games as well. And then obviously their attendance improved, their attainment improved. And yeah, as you said, it's just they're more than a number, aren't they? Students, they've got their own
totally.
likes, interests.
Yeah,
It's just being able to find out what they actually are.
yeah,
Having that triangulated approach, isn't it? Making sure that the teacher, parent, and student are all working in unison, all on the same page, is
exactly.
so crucial. Um, in terms of just a couple more questions I got for you, Lucy, because you've been amazing. Just in terms of what would you say to schools and trusts out there who are a bit might be reluctant to use alternative provision? You know, what checks do they need to do to implement an effective alternative provision? In a sense, what would you suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally get why people are concerned. There's a huge cost aspect to it, isn't there? And everyone knows the difficulty of applying for funding and things like that. All I would say is like there's a lot of free stuff. I mean, we do a lot of advocacy for our trusts and our schools, like we do for the parents. We are always here to talk about how we could support. And I'm not saying about, with our integrative tutoring. I'm just saying in terms of our advice, in terms of maybe the best way to position getting that SIF funding, or how to position a reintegration plan. Or, I've got some schools that we actually don't support at the moment because they've not got any students that need our support, or they have funding for right this second. But they'll often ping over like a reintegration plan and say, oh, we've got one learner who's just on the sort of EBSA road at the moment. What do you think about this? And that's like a totally free service. So I think that firstly, it's about finding those people who, spend a lot of time themselves, like making the connections, knowing what's out there in your local area, because there will be national providers, but also there will be really good local providers as well. So we actually run sort of local networking events, if you like, for all the local sort of alternative provision providers, and we look at the local authority who's commissioned by the local authority. We invite all of them. We also put it out to sort of other smaller local sort of alternative provisions. But obviously, safeguarding is important. There's a lot of trusts out there who will already have a really comprehensive set of commissioning documentations, or they'll have got those from the local authorities. Different local authorities work in different ways, and I would say there's some really good local authorities out there who support the schools with, hey, ask for this. Here's a template of these sort of commissioning documents that you need. But I would say that if you're unsure, a good alternative provision setting will kind of give you everything when you ask them anyway. So, we have a huge big pack of all the policies, all the documentation, and all the inside leg measurements of tutors. It sometimes seems quite a lot of information to be first passing over, but it in such a, working with such sort of important, and also in a way where the learner maybe isn't actually at the school, so they don't have eyes on that learner. So that's an incredibly careful sort of decision for a school to make, to get someone involved who's going to almost be their eyes a little bit on sort of saying, actually, yeah, you know what, they turned up today, that was great, this is what we did. So reporting is really important. And I think that just it's definitely about having those go-to kind of advisors, if you like, that don't have to be paid for advisors. They can just be advocates and people that will be able to give you that support to sort of look at what might be the best course of action. And I know that there's a lot of us on sort of LinkedIn and things like that. We get lots of LinkedIn messages from, sort of heads of individual schools, heads of, sort of larger sort of trusts, sort of looking at actually their alternative provision offerings themselves. A lot of people are sort of making their own internal APs, which is amazing, and that's great. Also, with that comes a lot of staffing sort of challenges and things like that. So that's one of the things that I think I'm always super happy to help people with, is looking at how you can really develop those pools of talented sort of AP ready workforce, if you like, because it's amazing how diverse it needs to be, isn't it? It's you might have the most amazing tutor, but just for child A, they are going to be not quite the right fit. but actually for child B, they're going to be their everything, and they're going to totally transform their life, So it's not just about knowing that you've just got a carbon copy type of educator. You need to have a lot of diversity. And I think that's one of the unique challenges that I really like about alternative provision, is how you can really get the matching sort of correct, because it's not just a case of, oh, we're looking for an outstanding biology teacher for AQA. It's like, it's so much more than that, So yeah, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it.
No, yeah, couldn't agree more. I think it's being able to find something different for these students, isn't it?
Yeah.
Offering that different layer of support. What we do is it's allowing schools and trusts to alleviate some pressure that's on them already, isn't it, to be able to provide a different alternative for these students. So
Yeah.
really important that AP is considered. Just one more from me for you then, Lucy. What would you say is one thing, the best reintegration model or best piece of advice you would give to maybe reintegrate a child back into mainstream education? What would you say?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really difficult. It's such a broad question. There's so many different ways that you can do it. But I would say that it would come back to identifying the fact that the reason that that learner is probably not attending school comes down to the fact that, if we boiled it down, the similar thing that's going to be the same for a lot of people is the anxiety, the cortisol, constantly feeling that they've been fight or flight, right? And so just trying to really, really focus on how you can create that plan. And obviously, we know that things change. I'm not saying that you make a plan and it all sticks exactly the same, but I think obviously that everyone says earlier intervention, and it'd be great to get them further upstream and things like that. But reality is that right now, doing that is not that possible, because it's going to take a while for sort of some of the internal APs to be set up. It's going to be, that what can we do right now? It's about really looking at our school environments, I think, identifying high control, high sort of pressurized situations for that learner. So really almost doing a bit of I wouldn't say sensory profile, because that then lends you to sort of thinking in one particular way, but looking at the points of challenge, the points of also areas that that learner excels in, and just starting to use that to your advantage. Don't push in the areas that are already challenging. Try and push in the areas where they are interested, and sort of try and use the positives to drive that engagement back into the setting. So much, one of the biggest problems I see is a reduced timetable, right? And I see, okay, they're struggling coming to school, let's reduce their timetable. But the problem with that method is that without other intervention, if you were absolutely terrified of heights and I said, do you know what? I was going to make you do a skydive, but instead you could just do the skydive. Instead of 3 minutes, you can do it for 1 minute. Would that make you any less stressed and pressurized just because I was reducing the time? It absolutely wouldn't. So it's about understanding that whilst there's good intentions behind a reduced timetable, that is not alternative provision. And we get a lot of schools where the first thing that they go to is a reduced timetable. And I guess if I could sort of say, like, one thing that I wish would be different in alternative provision right now, I wish that a reduced timetable wasn't the first step. Because actually, when you get to the point of needing a reduced timetable, there's other things that probably needed to be done before, but actually would still work if you did them first. So I would just say, knowing who to seek advice from, and also not seeing the first step towards alternative provision as a reduced timetable. I would say that would be two sort of key things that I think are important.
Amazing, yeah. Couldn't agree more. I think here at EDClass, we definitely agree with what you're saying. It's been really good to speak to you today. I mean, I think it's having that adaptive approach, isn't it? offering loads of different strategies, not just offering a part-time timer. Yes, they can be beneficial, but it's making sure they can be used sparingly alongside other strategies to overcome those barriers. But yeah, Lucy, you've been absolutely amazing this afternoon. Where can other people find some more information about you and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Education Boutique, we are part of the Eteach group. So obviously Eteach is one of the largest sort of education jobs boards and recruitment sort of ed tech products for maths and schools and things. So obviously on the Eteach website, but me, mostly LinkedIn, let's be honest. A lot of us are very sort of on LinkedIn. So I'm Lucy Alexandra Spencer on LinkedIn, and obviously Education Boutique as well.
Good stuff. I definitely like your content out there on the LinkedIn. Very good stuff out there in the newsletter. Love it. So yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot then, Tom. Cheers.
So that was Lucy Spencer. Great to see how we can use a collaborative approach to transform the lives of children using alternative provision. If you found this interesting and would like to find an online alternative provision solution for some of your students, contact EDClass on 01909 568 338 or email mail@edclass.com. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify accounts for more upcoming webinars and podcasts.
EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.